Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Bold and Sports Media NFL podcast, coming to you in the middle of the week because due to some technical issues, I usually record this on a Tuesday. However, technical issues mean we have had to push this on to the Wednesday. I'm now recording this and it is 2 minutes past 6 on Wednesday afternoon, but given the subject matters and what we're going to be talking about, they weren't really time sensitive. I can afford to push it forward by another 24 hours or so. But what I can't afford to push forward another 24 hours or so is the admin, which is to say thank you very much for joining. And as always, I need to do the plugs on the social media. If you are new, don't forget you can like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on. And don't forget to also reach out to us on our social medias. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Although TikTok, we'll have to wait and see because obviously there's some controversy on whether or not that is even going to exist in the coming days, but we shall keep social medias updated as we go. And then on Twitter, there's another platform that could be in jeopardy in the near future, but we are at MRB Sports Media on there, so feel free to reach out to us on there. And if you are a continued listener, then as always, a big thank you for keeping this thing going and showing me your continued support. Right. With that being said, let's go on with the topic. And obviously, this is the NFL playoffs. I'll be going into the sort of recap of the games later on, but we start with the off-field issues as we like to do. And the news coming out this week that there is some suggestion that the NFL could be looking to change the way they do the playoffs. Now, obviously, the playoffs have gone through some changes. Obviously, the most recent one a couple of years ago, where they went to 7 teams rather than 6 teams, and that indicated that only the number one seed got the bye, and so on and so forth. Extra games and so on. You know what the biggest change was. But there could be even more changes coming to the playoffs in the very near future because a report from CBS suggests that there is some talk within the league again. There's nothing really official or anything majorly proposed and on the table to be voted on yet, but there is some internal discussion, apparently, according to the report, that they are going to change the way the home field advantage is done. Because at the moment, as we stand, it is the 4 division winners that get the home playoff game in the first round, and then the wild cards have to go on the road, and then reseeding go on from there, moving forward. Now, subjects like this or to my mind, have only really come up when it comes to a team that has won the division but with a losing record. Like I remember the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did it a couple of years ago, and previously the Carolina Panthers hosted one, and I believe the Seattle Seahawks hosted one as well. Even though they had a losing record, they had to have a division winner or a non-division winner come to them, but with a better record. Obviously, the Seattle Seahawks one was the 7-19, was the Beastquake game, so goes down in NFL lore in that sense. And then the Panthers, off the top of my head, I believe they beat the Arizona Cardinals in that game. But either way, so it has happened a couple of times in NFL history, but the conversation sort of came up again this season because the Minnesota Vikings at 14-3 were forced to go on the road to the Los Angeles Rams. They were then forced to sort of go on the road as well to Arizona, but by the by. Basically, the Minnesota Vikings had to play an away game against Los Angeles Rams, who had a worse record than them. And now the discussion is that the NFL is looking to reseed, so it'll be the top 4 in terms of win percentage will be the 1, 2, 3, 4 seed, and then the rest of the teams will come in as the wild cards like that. So it would still be effectively the best 7 teams making it in, but when it actually is the teams, they'll be sorted by their records rather than necessarily the division. So for the purpose of this is how it would look this year. So it would still be the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Ravens. This in the AFC. It would still be the Chiefs, Bills, and Ravens 1, 2, and 3. That's fine. That goes in as it is. But then it would be the Chargers at the 4 seed, the Broncos at the 5, the Steelers at the 6, and the Texans at the 7. So again, in this world, it would be the Bills would be hosting the Texans, it would be the Ravens hosting the Steelers, which it did, and then the Chargers hosting the Broncos. That is how it would work. And then if you move over to the NFC, again, it would look quite different. So you'd have the Lions as the number 1 seed, the Vikings at the 2, the Eagles 3, Commanders 4, Packers 5, Rams 6, and then the Buccaneers 7 because they came in with the with the worst record. So again, in that scenario, it would be the Vikings hosting the Buccaneers, the Eagles hosting the Rams, and the Commanders hosting the Packers. So literally within the NFC, the whole thing completely changes. A couple of weeks in the NFC, but that is how it would be. Now, I've sort of gone a few ways about this because I was one of the people back in the day where, again, when the conversation come around about a team hosting a playoff game with a losing record, I was one of the people that said, okay, give the division winner the playoff game. Again, that is your right. You have earned it in a sense. You've earned the right to go to the playoffs. That was established beforehand. But if it is a losing record, then I think you maybe have the argument of switching the venue. So again, the 4 seed. I think I was having that discussion with the Carolina Panthers. So in that season, they were 7-8-1. So again, they still win the division, still given the playoff spot, but they would go to the Arizona Cardinals in that way. Again, they still and that was sort of part of the issue was because in those two scenarios, the previously where the Seattle Seahawks had theirs against New Orleans Saints, the Beast Quake, they won that game. So it kind of threw a wrench into the argument because, there would have been some people saying, they are the better team. They deserve the right to host the playoff game. They've done better over the course of the season. But then, of course, they go and lose. So was there really the argument to be had in the first place? So after seeing that a couple of times, I thought that, no, let's give them the home. Let's give them the home game. So when it comes to this discussion, I'm again not overly fond of it because I think once you do that, I believe you are one step closer to just eliminating divisions. And that's where I think I'm not going to say it's a major problem, but I think that's where it becomes a step two. That would be the next step. Because once you get rid of, and it's not done by division winners and, then the next logical step that everyone would go is, oh, just give it to the 7 best teams at the end of the season, with and then the step is they just get rid of the division, and effectively you just play the AFC schedule and the NFC schedule with some changes around it, and you probably would again in that end go to a fixed schedule where you play everyone in your conference once, home or away, home and away, and then you have the 2 teams in your in the NFC in the other conference again you play 2, so that way you get you still get your 17 game schedule in. So I think that is what is coming down the line if you start by doing this playoff reseeding and restructuring it in this way. So I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think it will make that much of a difference. It's not that much. Again, as we saw, the lower quote unquote, who would be the quote unquote lower seed in this, and the team with the worst record, went and won. So, do we really need to change it? Because it shows, hey, it's an even game. You want to prove you're the better team. You had your chance, and you didn't do it. So maybe there is that argument. I would lean more towards stay as is. I think the playoffs are pretty good as they are right now, especially with just the number 1 seed getting the bye. I always thought that was a little bit weird, the fact that 2 teams got the bye when it was 6 per conference. But again, I can understand why it was changed again, an extra game, more money, and all that stuff. So I think it would be a danger. I think it would be a dangerous next step to go with the reseeding. If you want to add more teams, I think that's fine. If you go to 8 per, if you go to 8 per conference, you would probably get rid of the bye unless, and I was doing the maths of this on the way home, unless you did still work out a way to have the top 2 take in a bye, but then you'd then have 6 teams going in, so maybe you'd give them 2 buys to go back to the old system. So there would be a way to complicate, but I think it would just complicate it further. If you went to 8 teams and still wanted to offer the buy as an incentive. So I think keep with 7 teams. I think a 17th works at the moment, especially for the broadcast. Again, you get 2 games Saturday, 3 games Sunday, the game on Monday night. In the future, I'm pretty sure that will also be spread out to, especially if it doesn't clash with the college football playoffs or something going on. I'm convinced there will be a time where it's 1 game on Friday, 2 games Saturday, 2 games Sunday, 1 on Monday. I'm sure that's going to happen at some point. But yeah, just keep things as they are. I think everything is pretty good, just the way it is. Right, but one thing that I do think needs to change, and that brings us on to our next topic, is the All Pro. selections. Now, the All Pro news, the All Pro selections rather, came out the other day, and I'll just give you a quick run through of exactly of the main headline, shall we say. So Lamar Jackson got first team All Pro. I'll be talking about that in a bit, but that does mean that he's more likely to lean towards getting the MVP. Saquon Barkley getting the running back. I think that's fine. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown getting the first team All Pro for there, with Terry McLaurin, CeeDee Lamb, and AJ Brown being the second team. Again, I'll sort of talk to that. Rookie Brock Bowers getting the tight end spot. I think I'm very happy with that. I was a big fan of his coming out. I knew that whoever he went to was gonna make an instant impact. So good for him. But the main headline that struck out to me, that comes out to me, and came out to a number of people, was the inclusion of Myles Garrett of the Cleveland Browns as the first team All Pro defensive end. Now, this is not me being a Pittsburgh fan and instantly hating on anything that Cleveland Browns and Myles Garrett do. Not at all. He is a great defensive player. I am not disputing that. Again, in a world, I would love to have TJ Watt and Myles Garrett on my team. They'd be brilliant. I'm not disputing Myles Garrett's talent. What I will say, though, is that I believe there is something fundamentally wrong with having the best defensive player or anyone on all pro with a losing record. This sort of touches back on the playoff discussion. And just for the record, I have the same issue with Fred Warner getting them the first team All Pro middle linebacker for the other, again with the losing record. It just doesn't sit right with me. I do believe that there should be a rule on this, that you cannot be AP All Pro first team. Second team might have a little bit of a grey area, but you cannot be All Pro on a losing team, on a team with a losing record, because it sort of says to me, right, just how good were you? Because you would think, because this, go back to the Joe Burrow discussion. Like, everyone was saying what a great season he had and was in the MVP discussion when he was getting his team to 9-8 and a chance to make the playoffs. If you are that impactful of a player, you can at least get them to a winning record. Again, if Myles Garrett was that good, again, and he is good, I'm not disputing that. But if he was one of the best players in the league, they would have more than 3 wins. Like, what are we doing here? If you're getting the best player is someone with 3, is someone on a team with 3, and again, it's not all down to him. It's not, it's not all down to one player. It's a team game. I get that. But again, if someone is that good, they should at least be able to will the team or through their production get them to a winning record. It's as simple as that. I can't believe that this is a thing where someone with 3 wins. I don't think I should have to repeat it, but if I feel like it needs repeating, 3 wins is an All Pro, is a first team All Pro. So yeah, it just sort of ground my gears a bit to see him go in as a first team All Pro and have that put onto his resume when again 3 wins. It just doesn't make sense to me. So a couple more things just to touch on around the All-Pro team. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and this sort of comes back to my conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago when I was talking about quarterback contracts. I can't remember exactly who it was. I believe it was Brock Purdy. But talking about how there's the sort of, you can be within the top 4 of salary if you are in the top 4. You don't necessarily have to be the best to be paid the best. But if you're like deemed as like the 3rd best, I can sort of give a little bit of wiggle room. It's the same sort of thing here. I can understand a little bit of wiggle room for, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen were the 2 best quarterbacks. I don't think anyone's really disputing that. If Josh Allen had been the first team and Lamar Jackson had been the second team, I would have understood that a little bit more, because as I've said before, I think Lamar Jackson has better weapons to work with on offense than Josh Allen does. Again, both great quarterbacks, but Lamar Jackson has a great O-line, has Mark Andrews, has Isaiah Likely, has Dalvin Cook, has Zay Flowers, who's had a brilliant season, to lean on, compared to the Buffalo Bills, who, again, a great roster, but I just don't see them being as good as, as an overall team as the Baltimore Ravens. James Cook is not as good as Derrick Henry. Again, fine running back, he's just not Derrick Henry. Again, Keon Coleman, Amari Cooper, Matt Collins, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, the wide receivers, the Bills. Good, not great. Again, not as good as the Ravens wide receivers. Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Quinton Ross, not as good as Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. And for both of them to get the production they did, again, I would just lean more towards Josh Allen. So again, if he'd have been first team All Pro, I don't think anyone really would have batted an eyelid. And again, with the streak that's been that the first team All Pro quarterback goes on to get the MVP, we are led to believe that this now means that Lamar Jackson will get MVP. Again, I don't think many people will argue with it. But if you'd flipped it around and given it to Josh Allen, again, the All Pro and the MVP, I don't think many people would have argued as well. I think both would have absolutely deserved it. And I just want to say sort of the same thing when it comes to the wide receivers. In my eyes, I would have swapped Amon-Ra St. Brown with AJ Brown. Again, I'd say, but not saying Amon-Ra doesn't deserve to be AP for or pro first team. But if you just switch those two, does it really look out of place? And are there really any complaints? I don't believe so. So those are really only my major complaints, if you will. One of the major, two of them sort of minor. But what I will say is, this one is, talking as a Steelers fan, a huge kudos to Chris Boswell for finally getting the recognition he deserves for being the first team All Pro kicker for this team, because he has been through a lot in Pittsburgh, and it's one of these narratives that, again, if you're not following the team and you don't pay as much attention, it probably misses you by. But he had a horrendous season in 2018. The way he has bounced back, the way he has, just continually, and then capping off with this season with the numbers he's got, and pretty much being the Pittsburgh Steelers MVP. Like, no one's the only player not to put a single foot wrong, bad pun, has been Chris Boswell this season. So huge kudos to him for coming around and sorting out and being a first team All Pro player. Absolutely 1000% deserved. And with that, we move on to the third part of our show. And in a little bit of a twist from previous weeks, where I just pick up all the headlines from just a couple of games that have sort of taken my interest. This week, I'm just going to quickly dive into each of the 6 playoff games that took place this weekend and just give my brief thoughts. Just my one main takeaway from that. And I'll start with the ones close to me, and that's the Steelers and the Ravens. And obviously, the Pittsburgh Steelers have got a lot of work to do. I think that it needs a reset. Not necessarily from top to bottom, but it needs major changes. The first one, I know it's not going to happen because the way the past couple of days have sort of gone and the reports coming out have hinted, Mike Tomlin needs to go, but he's not going to. I just think he's had enough excuses. If you want to put the last couple of years down to not being able to find the right quarterback after Ben Roethlisberger, and then maybe, the offensive coordinator, Matt Canada, was not very good. Whatever excuses you want to use, he had the perfect setup this year. He had Russell Wilson, a multi-time Pro Bowl quarterback, and someone who was borderline Hall of Fame. Again, that's what everyone, based on his time in Seattle, everyone's thinking he was borderline Hall of Fame. He's got talent, so you can't say he's still learning. He had a decent quarterback at his helm. Didn't have major injuries. One to George Pickens, they kept him out a couple of weeks, but there should be enough talent around. An injury to a quarterback is big, so that's one position, is the main position. One wide receiver, even if it's your number one, you should be able to spread the ball around a lot better to the rest of the team. Now, offensive line looked good, running back good, everything good on the offensive side of the ball. Defensive side of the ball, highest paid defense in the league. And again, no major injuries all the way through. It wasn't like TJ Watt was missing for half the season. He had no excuses, and it was still one and done in the playoffs. And there comes a point where you have to look at what is the common denominator. The common denominator is now Mike Tomlin. So change has to be made. I would start with Mike Tomlin, but the way it's going, it's not going to happen yet. So big changes definitely need to happen over the course of the offseason. We shall wait and see what those are. Chargers versus the Texans. My main takeaway from that is I'm glad that Justin Herbert got his money now, or had already got his money, because if he was going into a contract season, that is a performance that may have cost him, 25 to 50 million when you throw that many interceptions against not necessarily a bad Texans team, but a Texans team who were not in good stead going into it. That's the reason I wanted the Pittsburgh Steelers to play them, was because they were just as bad as us going into the playoffs. So you can't come away like that with a performance like that against a team, against a team like the Texans, and expect to be held in good esteem. The Bills and the Broncos, I think it's a good learning curve for Bo Nix and the Broncos as Sean Payton and the team sort of gets back to a good culture. Still, obviously, they may have found their franchise quarterback in Bo Nix, but let's just wait and see on that. But making the playoffs, coming up against the Bills, you can't really blame them because good it's a good team in the Bills, so there's no real shame in losing to them, and they will take a lot of points from this and use it for next season. So much to do, but I'm sure they will, as I say, learn from that. The Packers and the Eagles, again, similar to the Broncos. I don't think there's any real shame in what the Packers did, and I don't want to use this as a referendum on Jordan Love, like some people are. He just came up against a good team. Philadelphia Eagles, some people are still arguing are the best team in the NFC sort of on an all-round basis. So to go into Philadelphia and come away with that result, not necessarily something I'm going to, hang and say, right, he's a complete disaster. He's a fraud. Last year was a blip or whatever. I'm not going to say that. I think a good performance in the playoffs, all things considered. The Vikings and the Rams, similar to what I was talking about with Justin Herbert, I'm glad he got paid. I think Sam Darnold may have cost himself some money off the back of that performance. I don't think it's necessarily a disaster that some people think it's going to be, but it does still raise a pretty decent question as to what the Vikings do next year. Do they put this down as a one game blip for Sam Darnold, and the interceptions he threw and the performance he gave, or do they say, right, you got us this far. We're glad you were only really going to be here for 3 or 4 games anyway while we wait for JJ McCarthy to develop. He'll be back next year. Thanks, go on. I think this game does really throw in some big questions about what they do with Sam Darnold and what they are going to do moving forward. And then finally, the Monday night game, Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I don't want to see this as I've seen some people crowning him as, who was it? It was Colin Cowherd saying he's a mixture between Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. Slow down a bit. Okay, I think he's good. I think, offensive rookie of the year sewn up. I don't think there's any dispute about that. But let's just temper it just a little bit. As I said on my TikTok, I'm prone to hyperbole a little bit, but let's just wait and see just that little bit more. See what goes on before we start proclaiming him as anything, as any great savior of the quarterback position just yet. And with that, we end the show. But before I do, I always like to come up with one funny story from the week. And it's usually a funny story from outside the world of the NFL. But this one, I'm going to turn into sort of a public service announcement, if I may. And that is to the people of Twitter/X, depending on what you want to call it. Stop with the 4K stuff. I don't know why it has become a thing, but I'm sure if you're on Twitter or X, you have probably seen the memes or whatever you want to call it of, I think it's tap, hold, and load in 4K, where there's a tap an image, you have to hold down your thumb on the thing and it says load in 4K, and the image comes as in a slightly better quality. It's just not worth it. Because again, photos are pretty good these days anyway. You don't need to have an extra thing to have it in 4K. It doesn't really change all that much. But now all my timeline is being flooded with tap, hold, and load in 4K or whatever. It's just slightly annoying. And what's even worse is for some reason I can't mute the way you can mute words so they don't come up on your feed. I cannot find a way to mute because for some reason my app's not working or whatever, to mute the words tap, load, and hold in 4K. So it's still just flooding my timeline. So again, a PSA to stop doing it. It's not really worth it. You're not really impressing anyone with how you do it. But that is the end of the show. I want to once again thank you very much for listening. And don't forget, if you are new, you can like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on. And if you are a regular, Thank you very much, as always, for tuning in. And don't forget, if you're new or a regular, you can always follow us on social medias, whichever ones are still going to be around by the end of the week. But just in case they do survive, we are at Baldwin Sports Media on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. And on Twitter, we are at MRB Sports Media. That is it for this episode. So sorry once again for making it a day late. As I say, technical issues get the better of us sometime. Hopefully, we'll be back next Tuesday as normal. We'll be wrapping up the divisional round of the playoffs and some more off the field news as well. I do just want to a quick addendum. I just want to point out I will be talking about the head coaching appointments, but I want to do it when they're all done, just because I want to make sure who really made the right appointments, who should have gone where, whatever. So I'm gonna do a wrap up then once all the vacancies have been filled, rather than doing it sort of week by week as they go. So I just want to point out on that I will be covering it just at a later date. But as always, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, stay safe. And as always, I think pretty much, depending on where you are in the world, you have the California wildfires, a pretty big winter storm over here in the east. I'm sure there's everything going on around the world as well. So wherever you are, especially in this week of all weeks, stay safe, and I'll speak to you next week.